story, you guys, is going to be the history of the housing market crashes and elections. I'm actually going to go back all the way to the 1980s, and we're really going to dig in to find out how many times exactly have home prices went down. Now, I've played many clips, probably 100 times by now, of Dave Ramsey going on record saying that there's only been one time in history where home prices went down on a national level. You guys, there's actually been 5 times on a national level where home prices went down. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to look at the elections, and we're going to ask this question. So in my segment, we're asking the question, why do people, or rather, why do the bears, I'm a bear, I'm a koala bear though, so I'm gentle. Why do bears say the housing market is going to crash after election? Why are we saying that? And what I hope that the viewers are going to gain is an answer to that question. And I hope that the viewers will identify through their own research and mine that there are 5 different crashes, and how do the elections actually play a role in keeping values propped up? What's leading to these crashes? And so, you guys, that's where I'm going to start today. Let me go ahead and throw up my screen right here. So what we're going to do, guys, is first we're going to identify when the housing market actually crashed, because it is a fairly rare phenomenon. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to review this article right here. This is New Silver. Now, the title is When Did the U.S. Housing Market Crash? 2 bullet points I kind of want to go over real quick. Number one, the U.S. housing, first of all, you guys, this article is basically stating that there are 2 things that stand out above the rest of the factors when comparing the housing market crashes. The number one thing is the U.S. housing bubble popped. So a bubble had to form before it popped. Now, a housing bubble occurs when there's a rapid increase in the market value of housing, kind of like what we had recently, followed by an even faster decrease in value. That's what we're waiting on, which is what is referred to as a crash or busting. Simply put, house prices in the U.S. were widely overinflated. Market sentiment was overly optimistic, and a market correction was bound to occur. It was bound to occur. Bullet point number 2, commonalities, okay? Borrowers, and here's the thing, you guys, I hear foreclosure crisis, subprime loans. The reality is the good people credit loans stop paying their mortgages as well. In fact, more people with great credit stop paying than the people with the bad credit. Borrowers, bullet point 2, borrowers couldn't pay their loans back. This is called the subprime mortgage crisis. But again, I call that an affordability crisis. Melody, would you agree with that? Do you think that it was more only the subprime borrowers stop making their payment? I mean, you went through this, or was it also the prime borrowers?
No, the majority were the prime borrowers. The non-prime were the non-traditional products, the investors, plus, because in reality, even our non-traditional products lending that we did, and we were considered a non-prime, subprime lender, were actually of great credit quality. So if we did a stated income loan or an Alt-A, the credit score would have to be very high for that to get through. And so in reality, subprime was, again, smoke, but it's the smoke they used to distract everyone with what was actually happening. And it, who ultimately got wrecked were those prime borrowers.
Travis, if I could weigh in real quick there, I don't think it's so much important as to when subprime stops paying to the formation of the bubble or the bursting of the bubble. I think it's when they start marketing to subprime, that's when the bubble is almost exhausted, right? If you're blowing a bubble with bubble gum, you have to blow the hardest to get that last little bit of inflation, right? So
I mean, it's hard, Jack, because I was in the business starting in 2002, and to me, the fraud was there the whole time. So it's hard.
It really started pushing. It got really ridiculous at the very end, right? That's when they really start pumping it out, when they're looking to expand the population of buyers because there's no one less to buy.
I will say that towards the end of the subprime collapse, as they say, they did make a huge push for the neg-am loans, those negatively amortized loans where it had a minimum payment that didn't even cover the interest. So there was a push, you're right, at the end to kind of squeeze the remaining juice out for sure. But I wanted to read this because this is contrary to what we just said. Importantly, the U.S. housing market was overloaded with subprime mortgages. But again, they're saying the borrowers couldn't pay, and that's the real issue. It wasn't necessarily the subprime mortgages, although that was a contributor, okay? But this goes on. The borrowers started to default on loans, and it goes on. They should have never been issued in the first place. But like Melody and I are trying to say, that hit conventional products, prime, good credit loans as well. And this is what I want to point out, you guys, okay? Look at the housing market crashes. Here's a timeline of major housing crashes in the US. Again, this is contrary to what David Ramsey says. And I want to make a point as well. This is only showing 4. I told you guys before we started, we actually had 5. And I know some of people wanted a definition of a crash. They're defining a crash as basically prices going down. They are not including the housing market crash of 1990. 1990 also had prices go down, but this is referring to the 4 crashes that happened in 1837, 1873, 1929, and 2008. And again, you guys, in a minute here, I'm going to put an overlay of the election cycle as well. But what I wanted to point out is we did have a housing market crash. Values of homes did go down. Now, the first one was the Panic of 1837. I think it's very interesting because there's some common themes here that pretty much all crashes have. And I think that we're experiencing the same thing right now. Now, the 100 years between 1800 and 1900 were trademarked by several peaks and busts in the real estate market, reminiscent of the markets today. And again, this is, although it's rare, it's kind of a healthy thing. The most prominent early example took place in 1837 when the stock market peaked and launched a depression that would last until the 1840s. So what I really want you guys to pick up is that it takes time. And this was a huge, the stock market was a huge contributor to what was happening in 1837. Now, the next housing market crash, something similar happened in 1873, stock market crisis. The 1873 stock market crisis, or Panic of 1873, originated in the US, but had global repercussions, triggering widespread economic downturn and financial instability. Right now, like the report that Jack just did, I mean, Melody we have issues in Germany, Japan, China. The globe is getting hit. We have a little bit of a globalization process going on. But this is the second paragraph, and this is very interesting. A full-scale bank collapse contributed to the economic turmoil of the time, with severely established banks falling to their knees. So far what we have here is an overvalued stock market that crashes, and we have banks going under. The third housing market crash is the Great Depression of 1929 to 1939. Again, you guys, we've had multiple eras of price crashes in the housing market, although it is rare. The most notable crash, Dave Ramsey, someone give this to Dave Ramsey, is of the 1990s, took place in 1929 with the crash of Wall Street. Again, the stock market. Isn't the stock market overvalued right now, Jack? Can you confirm that or not?
Oh, that's just one of those crazy conspiracy theories there, Travis, that we have overvalued stock markets with companies trading at 40 times sales. You know, take them 40 years to earn back what you're paying for the stock. That's just a conspiracy theory. I don't know.
Okay, well, enough of your conspiracy theories. This article goes on. As a result of the crash of the 1990s, prices fell. Sit down. Dave Ramsey missed this, you guys. 67%. House prices fell 67%, with properties plummeting in value and bank lending decreasing as well. It happens. It happens, you guys. This is nothing new. There's literally nothing new about what's going on right now. Now, again, this is skipping 1990s. It goes on to the 2008 housing bubble. And I'm just going to read this thing down here for you guys, and then we're going to go into the election timelines. In 2007, real estate crashed completely, with hundreds of thousands of homes going into foreclosure, multiple subprime lenders declaring bankruptcy, and the market requiring government bailout. What's interesting, guys, is right now we've already got the government bailout. It's called inflation. So, which means any additional bailouts at this point, because we're battling inflation, will make things worse for us. So it's really important that we, and I'm not going to go into politics here, but that we elect people that are not just going to spend money that we have to pay. And the reality is all of this taxes, all of these fees, it's being put into the values of our houses. The real people that are paying the inflation and all of this reckless spending are the new homeowners 100%. It's insane, absolutely shocking to me. That's where the value is. That's why the stock market, the economy is still kind of trucking along. We don't have the the decline in value yet. Now, here's the thing, guys. Let's go to the election dates. Okay, so here's all of the dates of the election, and I'm going to point out a few things. I'm basically going to show you guys what happens during the election cycles as it pertains to the housing market crashes. So the first housing market crash was I wrote this down here, it was 1837. Okay, so the first housing market crash was in 1837, and you'll notice, and you guys are about to see a trend here, and it's really shocking. This is why bears say after election, the housing market will crash. The first housing market crash in our history happened 1 year after election. Okay, 1 year after election. The second housing market crash happened in 1873. There was elections in 1872. The second housing market crash in America happened 1 year after election. Okay, the third housing market crash happened 1929. All right, we had in a presidential election, you guys know when? 1928. 1 year after election, we had a housing market crash. The only time that is not true is the most recent housing market crash of 2008. In essence, in 2008, that was the presidential election, and that was essentially the start of the housing market crash. You can kind of look into 2007, but my point here, y'all, is according to this article, 75% of the known reported on this article, okay, so on this article, 75% of the housing market crashes happened 1 year after presidential election. So I would say this is somewhat founded, but there's more, you guys. I want to show you something else. Okay, what happens to the housing market in an election year? I want to read these 3 bullet points, and I want to show you what the housing market does the year of election. Now, first of all, the first 3 bullet points is, despite the common belief that elections negatively impact the housing market, data does not prove out this theory. So according to this article, elections do not negatively impact the housing market. It's the year after the election. Bullet point number 2, the housing market is influenced by a variety of factors, including supply and interest rates, and have a greater impact than the presidential election. I would definitely agree with that. Supply is important, despite the bulls no longer thinking it is. Bullet point number 3, for most Americans, election results will have little direct effect on their income and therefore should not significantly impact their decision to buy and sell a house. Okay, fine. But let me show you guys this, okay? So I'm going to scroll down here, and what I have done, and let me try to zoom in here, is I've highlighted for you the election years. Okay, first of all, is I've highlighted in yellow the election year. To the right of the year that's highlighted in yellow is home price appreciation. And what I'm going to point out here is how almost every single election year, home prices go up because the president or whoever wants to become president or stay president continues to prop up the economy, because usually people vote on the president based on how they're doing financially. Okay? And I'm pointing that out again because that's what's going on right now. They're propping up the housing market so they can try an easier path to election. That's my opinion. But look at you guys. If we go back to 1988, look at the previous year. Okay. First of all, 1988 had a 7.23% increase in value. Let's go to 1992. So we go to 1992, the election year had a 0.82% increase in value. If you look at the last, previous 2 years, there was decreases. So again, going into the election year, home values started accelerating. When we go into the 1996 presidential election, again, same thing. Home values went up 2.43%. The previous year was 1.79. Previous to that, 2.52, 2.16. Now, when we get into the years of 2000, we can definitely see the difference. The year of 2000, home values went up during election year almost double digits to 9.29. If you guys look at the last 4 years preceding the election, you'll see that this is the highest amount of equity increase. Now, again, they're getting good at this, because the politicians now understand that our whole livelihood is kind of wrapped up in our homes. It's a really sad thing. And look at 2004. You can really see this in 2004. They went crazy. 2004, home values went up 13.6%. The previous years, 9.8, 9.5, 6.6. Home values went up the most during the election year. But again, you guys, that did change in 2008, which again was an election year. We actually lost 12% in value, which is absolutely crazy. But then we go back to on track. Look at 2010. 2010, home values went up. I'm sorry, 2012. I apologize, guys. 2012, home values went up 6.4% during an election year. Look at the previous 3 years before election. Home values went down all 3 years because, again, they understand how important homes are to people. Homes are to voters. We fast forward to 2016. Same thing, you guys. 2016, 5.3% come up. Look at the previous year, 5.2. Previous before that, 4.5. Then we go to 2020. Same thing in 2020. 2020, 10.43% equity increase during election. Previous year was 3.6. So it went up 3 times the amount roughly during the election year. Now, again, here's the thing. Okay, sorry about that. Here's the thing that I'm really trying to highlight here. Elections do matter. And the reason that they matter is because it appears, again, we looked at the data, it appears that the powers that be are just propping things up. And my warning to people is that the more that the government and politicians, the deficit spending, the Federal Reserve, the more and more they continue to prop up the housing markets based on the backs, especially of new homeowners, of homeowners that are on fixed income, the more pain that is going to come, the bigger the bill will be. We need a natural course of a reset. And guys, you know, in conclusion, you guys, here's where I want to conclude. If we look at historically, if we look at the 4 housing market crashes, they didn't want to count 1990. Housing market crashes happen 1 year after election, 75% of the time, based on historical data. And that's the information that I want to give to the viewers today. What do you guys think about that?
So Travis, something I just also though, like we can look at that year and look back at price levels then, but in 2008, during that season, prices did increase. And so, you know, although over that year they went down, while people were campaigning, they were increasing. And so that happened even in 2008. So I think absolutely, you know, it matters. And I think, you know, my question for you on that data is just kind of, did it change sort of how you're thinking about, I mean, this, I think, you know, just what we might see this year, or how do you think this might play out?
It did change my perspective, Melody, because it strengthened it. I already saw the deficit spending. I knew that greedy people want to stay in power. I knew that dishonest people would continue to lie to stay in power. I knew all of that. What I found surprising is I was able to track down, you know, with that article's help, 2 additional housing market crashes, which was in the 1980s. And I found it very intriguing that 75%, 3 of the 4 of those housing market crashes actually happened 1 year after the campaigning. So again, you know, by me digging deeply, it further reinforces what we're saying, that the country is being ran by a bunch of liars.
Travis, I have a question for you. I didn't live through 1929, obviously, but it's recent enough, and you know, I had distant relatives that lived through it that I was able to interact with over the years. We know how severe 29 was. We know how severe 2008 was. I'm not too familiar with the 1837 and 1873 panics. And notably, we didn't have a central bank back then to go Zerpenber to try to rescue us from those panics. Now, have you done any research, or do you know anything about how severe those housing market crashes were? How long did they last? Were the dips any bigger than the 2 more recent ones? Because I wonder, were we better off when we didn't have a central bank to come help when the market crashed?
Well, I'm just going to say, hell yeah, we were, because by the Fed being involved, they continue to devalue money, and we have to pay for that, and they save the banks at our expense. So despite what I'm about to read, I would say, well, I got to be careful. I don't want to get us shut down. But as far as 1837, I mean, 1837's lasted until, you know, that recession lasted into the, you know, 1840s. So it was that's kind of a long recession. And also, Jack, 1873, it's hard to get information on the 1800s. You know, it
obviously
doesn't give me
data wasn't so good back then.
One thing I would say, guys, though, because I have done some research into these historical periods, is that it might not have been the Fed, but typically what you would find as the reason that you got yourself into this trouble was that there was some form of easy money, whatever it was at the time. But and that is ultimately what happened, is that, you know, you had that credit loosening, now not as sort of not as or established as like the Fed, but it would be some type of government intervention that was some sort of easy money policy that then would lead to these bubbles as well. So not the Fed, but similar type of monetary policy.
That was another thing. So we had that stock market euphoria kind of busting, but then pretty much every single scenario was also a financial crisis. So it's kind of like, so I asked myself, Melody, Jack, do you guys think that the financial crisis this time, well, I'll say consumers not paying their debt because we see that trajectory, but what about CRE? I mean, you just did a story on that, Jack. I mean, can't commercial real estate meltdown be the next financial crisis?
I mean, it already is, right? We're extending pretend. We're just pretending it's not happening. And by we, I mean the banks. And that the inevitable pain from that collapse is being slowly put on our backs while we're being reassured constantly by the establishment financial press that everything is okay. And then when we point out, hey, everything's not okay, we're called doomers. It's one of the reasons why we started this network, right? But yeah, absolutely. I mean, take your pick for today's market. What do you want? You got record consumer debt. You've got record housing prices. You've got record stock prices. You've got commercial real estate. You've got a collapse going on in Japan of their currency. You've got a real estate collapse going on in China. Oh yeah, World War III. So pick your poison as far as the triggers. I don't know that we've had as many different things all going on at once, any one of which could cause an event like this, or maybe one triggers all of them, like dominoes.
Well, let's take this question right here. This is Jungle Book. Shout out to you, brother. Cool dog. He's in our Discord group. We try to have a little bit of a family there. He has a question, and I'd like you guys to answer this, starting with Melody. How does today's market compare to other crashes? How much of a crash do you think? Melody, I mean, we're guessing. It's impossible to guess fully accurately. What do you think we're going to see this time around, Melody, and how does it compare from your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me to give you the absolute percentages, but what I would say is that, I think we are going to see a similar kind of reversion back. We're going to probably see around a 30% overall decline, if not a little more, but it will take a long time, as you kind of illustrated, Travis. These things, housing is like the Titanic. It takes a lot longer to turn it than to sink it. And so, it just takes time for these things to play out. But I think likely what will occur if there's not an exogenous event is we'll see kind of a 5% decline on aggregate at the end of this year. And then a much steeper decline of between what we saw, probably that 12% that you were talking about in 2008, Travis, like between a 12, 15% in 2025, with a few more years of just kind of price declines, not as stark, but similar to 2008, where you bottomed out from home price depreciation in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, actually 5 years if you count 2007. And Jack, will you add on any comparisons? And I have another really good question. Charles Wang.
So maybe not so much a comparison as I would say with each crash that we've seen, at least in my lifetime, the size of the government's intervention and response has been growing exponentially. Yeah. And it's easy money, and lowering interest rates to fight recessions is very much like a narcotics addiction. The longer you do it and the more you do it, the bigger the fix has to be to achieve the same effect. And easy money is every bit a financial narcotic. So with the next crash, it's hard to handicap how big of a crash, because that depends on how big of an intervention. And so in my opinion, it's not so much like what percent will homes go down, what percent will stocks go down. It's going to be how much do they lower rates and how much money do they print? And then how bad will the next iteration of inflation be after that? And we've seen it gets worse and worse each time. And we are getting to the point where now debt to GDP is so big that by the time the next hike cycle comes around, when it's time to fight inflation again, the debt will be so big they won't be able to raise those interest rates because the government will become insolvent. And that's what Japan is dealing with right now. And that's why the yen is collapsing against the dollar, because Japan has 260% debt to GDP. They need to raise rates to stop the collapse of their currency, but they can't because they'll be instantly insolvent if they do that.
Germany, China. I mean, it's just happening around the world. This is nothing new. It's just the bulls are incentivized to continue to sell you on spending money. In fact, their jobs, listen to me, guys, their livelihood and jobs depends on you continuing to buy no matter the danger. I want you guys to remember that. I have another really good comment right here. This is from Charles. Thanks for your support, Charles. I see you on my own channel. I love you, brother. I just appreciate your engagement. He's got a really good thing. I mean, this is a good point. Either you have to be poor to get government support or super rich. The middle class, will say, is kind of screwed. What do you think about that, Melody?
Well, this is why I often talk about the forgotten American. I took that name from a book by Amity Shlaes called The Forgotten Man, which is about the Depression. And it's about how, they did all kinds of crazy policies back then to try to get the economy back on track. Sound familiar? Some crazy tariffs sound familiar. They were doing everything they could, but typically what would keep happening is it was always the folks in the middle, the hardworking people who were just trying to pay their taxes, went to work every single day, that just completely got screwed every single time. And so I absolutely believe that all of this is being carried on the back of that forgotten American who is paying their taxes and getting up and going to work every day, sometimes at 2, 3, 4 jobs.
Jack? Good answer.
Yeah, I would say the destruction of the middle class is, the people that are doing it better be careful, because as the wealthy have been getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, it's been at the expense of the middle class. Most of the middle class has been pushed below the poverty line or down near the poverty line. A few lucky few, probably most of us here on this channel and most of the people watching are probably lucky enough that they've escaped into the upper middle class. But that's very few. Most people have been pushed down and are now seeing big declines in their standard of living. And when you run out of a middle class to squeeze, that's when the garden tools come out, and the people at the top need to be very careful in that scenario. They're playing with fire with what they're doing. And I think that they're going to regret it someday. I really do.
I'm gonna say, in my opinion, Charles, that here's the bigger crisis that literally no one is talking about. It's the American family. Those are the people that are getting screwed. The husbands, wives, children. The inflation is affecting their livelihoods, their ability to learn, the chiseling down of the family and the unity of a husband, wife, children. That's the crisis here. The more that's chiseled down, the less protection that we have as consumers. It's a horrible, horrible thing, but I do have a little bit of time, so I'm going to do one more question. Okay? Don't be mad. I left myself a little bit of time. This is the last one, okay? This is an interesting comment from KPal. I love that profile. I love the profile picture, KPal. It kind of makes you wonder if we're in a transitory, this is good, transitory stagflation period followed by deflation. That's an interesting comment. What do you think, Melody?
So it's really, really hard to make this call right now because of that government intervention and the form it's going to take. But I think if forces were left to their own, that we would start to see deflation. Because we're really already starting to see it. And many will argue that we never had monetary inflation, but we can all say we've had higher prices, and so it could be that we are in this transitory kind of stagflation period. I think long term, my thesis for exactly what Jack was just saying is that this is different from the the hyperinflation folks. I think that if we start seeing increases in inflation from where we are today, and I mean by prices, that the pitchforks will start to come out. People will not be able, that's when you'll have social unrest. And so I do think that we're going to see deflation.
Jack? You're muted again. Jack loves muting himself, Melody. He's so polite. He's just so polite.
Shut up.
All right, go ahead.
So right now we don't have stagflation, right? I'm not sure the textbook definition, but it's something like economic contraction, typically including higher unemployment with simultaneous price increases in inflation, right? That's stagflation. We don't have that right now. But what we do have, I would say, I'm getting a little semantic here. We are stagflationary right now.
Sure.
We have unemployment is rising, economic growth is slowing. So we're heading towards part of that stagflation environment. And at the same time, inflation is still sticky high. And we're seeing things like commodity prices are starting to run pretty heavy here, right? Gold near all-time highs, silver's going up. So we are seeing early signs of potentially a second wave of inflation that may eventually appear. So I'd say we're trending in a stagflationary direction, but we're not there yet. And to Melody's point, that government intervention that we all know is coming, that's such a huge variable that we can't see what it is yet. It's hard to make a call about what's going to come out the other side until we get some quantities there on what they're going to do.
And just quickly, I'll say though, we can say that we're not there yet because, some people like Danielle DiMartino Booth think we're already in recession, and that when they restate these numbers, restate GDP, things of that we might already be at those sort of contraction levels. And so it could be that, because I agree with you, Jack, by the definition, we're not, but we're definitely in that kind of, like, what did you call it again?
Stagflationary?
Yes, exactly.
We're trending there.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, guys, I just want to end by, to the viewers, if you're on the sideline, just be patient. I mean, we just showed you data. Things take 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But if you don't want to have patience, if you still want to buy because you think you're in a great situation, for the love of God, please use fundamentals like wedge, cash flow, and doing your homework. Don't just blindly purchase real estate. Please. And don't trust the people that are working for you. Never trust. You could trust them, but verify. Plan ahead to get ahead. And that's a wrap.